Can you imagine growing enough food to feed your family for an entire year without a single trip to the grocery store? Before refrigeration became common in the 1940s, this wasn't just possible, it was necessary. Today we're exploring 25 ingenious methods our grandparents used to preserve their harvest and keep their families fed through every season. Let's start with root cellar storage. These earthen cellars were the cornerstone of year-round food security, maintaining the perfect conditions of 32 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit with 85 to 95% humidity. Dug 8 feet into the ground below the frost line, these underground rooms could store thousands of pounds of produce. Potatoes went into wooden bins, carrots nestled in boxes of damp sand, and turnips, beets, and parsnips lined the shelves in baskets. A properly managed root cellar kept vegetables fresh from October harvest right through to the following May. Families would venture down wooden steps into these cool, dark chambers, emerging with armfuls of produce that tasted nearly as fresh as the day it was harvested. The key was ventilation. 2 pipes, one near the floor and one near the ceiling, created air circulation that prevented mold while maintaining humidity. Many homesteads had root cellars that lasted generations, with some still functioning today after more than a century of continuous use. Cool pantry larder. This shaded, ventilated room was the command center of food preservation, typically built on the north side of the house where temperatures stayed coolest. Unlike modern pantries tucked inside heated homes, these larders featured thick walls, often double-layered with insulation materials like sawdust or straw packed between. Small windows covered with fine mesh kept insects out while allowing air to circulate. Shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling, holding hundreds of mason jars filled with preserved goods, crocks of pickles and sauerkraut, and sacks of flour, sugar, and cornmeal. The temperature rarely exceeded 60 degrees even in summer, and in winter it hovered just above freezing. Cheese wheels aged on upper shelves, strings of dried herbs and peppers hung from the rafters, and baskets of onions and garlic filled the corners. Everything had its place based on optimal storage conditions. Items needing the most ventilation went near windows, while those requiring darkness stayed in lower cupboards. A well-organized larder could hold 6 months to a year's worth of dry goods and preserved foods, making it possible to weather poor harvests or harsh winters. Pressure canning meats. This revolutionary technique, perfected in the 1920s with the introduction of home pressure canners, allowed families to safely preserve low-acid foods that would otherwise spoil quickly. The process involved heating jars to 240 degrees Fahrenheit at 10 pounds of pressure, hot enough to destroy botulism spores that regular boiling couldn't kill. Beef stew, chicken soup, green beans, corn, and even whole meals could be sealed in jars and stored for years. A typical canning day started before dawn, with the whole family participating, cutting meat into chunks, preparing vegetables, and filling dozens of quart jars. The pressure canner, often holding 7 quarts at a time, would run continuously from morning until late evening. The distinctive pop of sealing lids meant success, each one representing another meal secured for the future. Families would can 200 to 300 jars of meat annually, often processing an entire steer or several hogs in marathon sessions. These jars lined pantry shelves like edible insurance policies, ready to provide protein-rich meals at a moment's notice. The meat stayed tender and flavorful, and having pre-cooked meals in jars meant a hot dinner could be on the table in minutes, even during the busiest harvest times. Water bath canning fruit. This gentler preservation method worked perfectly for high-acid foods like tomatoes, peaches, pears, and all manner of jams and jellies. The process required only a large pot of boiling water, making it accessible to every household with a wood stove. Fruit was packed into sterilized jars with sugar syrup, sealed with lids, and processed in boiling water for specific times based on altitude and jar size. A family might put up 300 to 500 jars each season, transforming summer's bounty into winter's treasures. The kitchen became a steam-filled factory during canning season, with multiple pots boiling simultaneously and every surface covered with cooling jars. Women often gathered for canning bees, working together to process bushels of peaches or make huge batches of apple butter. The sealed jars created a vacuum that kept fruit fresh for years, though most was consumed within 12 months. These preserved fruits weren't just food. They were morale boosters during long winters, bringing the taste of summer sunshine to dreary February meals. The sight of shelves lined with jewel-toned jars of strawberry jam, golden peaches, and ruby-red cherries represented security and abundance. Crock fermentation. Long before anyone understood probiotics, our grandparents knew that fermented foods kept well and aided digestion. Large ceramic crocks, some holding up to 20 gallons, transformed fresh vegetables into long-lasting staples through controlled fermentation. The process was beautifully simple. Shredded cabbage mixed with salt became sauerkraut, while whole cucumbers in brine turned into pickles that would last all winter. The salt drew moisture from vegetables, creating a brine where beneficial bacteria thrived while harmful organisms couldn't survive. Weighted plates kept vegetables submerged beneath the brine, and a clean cloth covered the crock to keep dust out, while allowing gases to escape. After several weeks at room temperature, the fermented vegetables moved to cold storage, where they continued developing complex flavors. A single large crock of sauerkraut could provide vitamin C through the entire winter, crucial for preventing scurvy when fresh vegetables weren't available. Beyond cabbage and cucumbers, families fermented green tomatoes, beans, beets, and even watermelon rinds. These probiotic-rich foods aided digestion of heavy winter meals and provided essential nutrients when fresh produce was months away. Salt curing. This ancient preservation method turned fresh meat into products that could hang in the smokehouse or cellar for months without refrigeration. The process began immediately after slaughter, usually in late fall when cool temperatures helped prevent spoilage during the curing process. Heavy applications of salt, often mixed with sugar and spices, drew moisture from pork bellies, hams, and shoulders. The salt penetrated deep into the meat over several weeks, creating an environment where bacteria couldn't survive. After the initial curing, excess salt was brushed off and the meat either went to the smokehouse or aged in cool, dry conditions. Country hams cured this way could hang for a year or more, developing complex flavors prized by modern chefs. Salt pork, packed in barrels with layers of coarse salt, provided cooking fat and flavoring for beans, greens, and stews throughout the year. Fish got the same treatment. Salt cod and herring were dietary staples that could travel anywhere without spoiling. A properly salt-cured ham was both food and investment, sometimes used as currency or saved for special occasions. Cold smoking. Unlike hot smoking that cooked meat, cold smoking at temperatures below 90 degrees Fahrenheit preserved it while adding incredible flavor. Smokehouses, those small outbuildings that dotted rural properties, were carefully designed to maintain steady, cool smoke for days or even weeks. Hardwood fires burned in pits or fireboxes, with smoke traveling through underground pipes to cool before reaching the hanging meat. Hams, bacon, sausages, and fish hung from rafters, slowly absorbing smoke that created a protective coating while driving out moisture. The process required constant attention. Too much heat would spoil the meat, while too little smoke wouldn't preserve it properly. Different woods imparted distinct flavors: hickory for bold taste, apple for sweetness, oak for traditional character. A well-smoked ham could hang in a cool, dry place for 2 years without spoiling. Families often smoked enough meat in late fall to last until the next butchering season. The combination of salt curing and cold smoking created products that traveled well, making them valuable for trade and essential for pioneers heading west. Sun and air dehydration. Before electric dehydrators, the sun and wind provided free preservation that concentrated flavors while eliminating moisture that bacteria needed to survive. String-dried apple rings decorated farmhouse kitchens each fall, while ropes of red peppers and braided garlic adorned porches and barn walls. The technique required timing and weather awareness. Hot, dry days with low humidity worked best. Thin slices dried fastest, and a light salting or sulfur treatment prevented browning in fruits. Screens made from wood and cloth kept insects away while allowing maximum airflow. Green beans, strung on thread and hung to dry, became leather breeches that reconstituted beautifully in winter soups. Corn cut from the cob and spread on sheets dried into kernels that ground into meal or plumped up when soaked. Herbs bundled and hung upside down in attics retained more flavor than any modern preservation method. These dried foods weighed a fraction of their fresh counterparts, making them perfect for travel or trade. A pound of dried apples equaled 8 pounds fresh, concentrating both nutrition and flavor into portable packages. Low oven dehydration. When weather didn't cooperate for sun drying, the kitchen stove's gentle heat finished the job reliably. Wood stoves with precise damper control could maintain temperatures between 100 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect for dehydration without cooking. Oven racks lined with cloth held single layers of sliced vegetables, fruits, or herbs. The oven door stayed slightly open to allow moisture to escape, and trays rotated regularly for even drying. This method worked especially well for tomatoes, which became flavor bombs when slowly dried to leather-like consistency. Beans spread on trays after initial field drying ensured complete dehydration that prevented mold during storage. Leafy greens like kale and chard, blanched first, then oven-dried, crumbled into flakes that added nutrition to winter soups. The process took 6 to 12 hours depending on the food's moisture content, with someone checking progress regularly. Properly dried food snapped cleanly when bent, indicating moisture levels below 10%. These dried goods, stored in cloth bags or glass jars, provided variety in winter meals when fresh produce was just a memory. Fruit leather sheets. Long before commercial fruit roll-ups, grandmothers pureed excess fruit into thin sheets that dried into portable, concentrated sweetness. Apples, peaches, berries, and even grapes were cooked down, strained, and spread onto buttered plates or cloth-lined trays. The puree, sometimes sweetened with honey or mixed with spices, dried slowly in the sun or near the stove until it peeled away in flexible sheets. These fruit leathers provided quick energy during hard physical labor and served as special treats for children. Properly dried leather could last a year when stored in cool, dry conditions, rolled in wax paper or cloth. The concentrated fruit flavors intensified through the drying process, creating complex tastes impossible to achieve any other way. Mixed fruit leathers used up small quantities of various fruits that might otherwise go to waste. Some families added nuts or seeds before drying, creating protein-rich trail food. During winter months, these leathers could be reconstituted with water to make instant fruit sauces or pie fillings. Sandbox root storage. This simple technique kept root vegetables crisp and fresh for months, using nothing more than clean sand and wooden boxes. Carrots, beets, turnips, and parsnips were harvested after the first frost sweetened them, then carefully cleaned of soil but not washed. Wooden boxes in the cellar were layered with damp sand, vegetables arranged so they didn't touch, then covered completely with more sand. The sand maintained perfect humidity while preventing vegetables from drying out or touching each other, which could spread rot. Every few weeks, someone would check the boxes, removing any vegetables showing signs of deterioration. This method kept carrots so fresh they snapped crisply even in March, 8 months after harvest. The sand could be reused year after year if kept clean and occasionally remoistened. Some families used sawdust instead of sand, though it didn't maintain moisture quite as well. This storage method was so effective that market gardeners used it commercially, shipping vegetables long distances in sand-packed barrels, garden clamps, and pits. When cellar space ran short, vegetables stayed right in the garden under protective mounds that insulated them from freezing. These temporary storage structures, called clamps, started with a layer of straw on well-drained ground. Vegetables were piled in cone shapes, covered with more straw, then sealed with a layer of soil that shed rain while allowing slight ventilation. A piece of board or pipe at the top provided access and air circulation. Properly built clamps kept potatoes, turnips, and cabbages fresh from harvest through spring. Different vegetables required different storage conditions. Potatoes needed complete darkness to prevent greening, while cabbages benefited from slightly more ventilation. Pits dug below the frost line and lined with straw provided even better insulation in harsh climates. Families often built several smaller clamps rather than one large one, since opening them in winter meant using the contents quickly. The technique required experience to perfect. Too much ventilation caused freezing, while too little led to rot. Straw-packed apple barrels. Apples required special handling to last through winter, and the barrel packing method maximized storage life while minimizing bruising and rot. Only perfect, unblemished apples were selected, picked with stems intact to prevent decay at that vulnerable point. Each apple was wrapped in paper or placed in wood shavings, then carefully arranged in barrels with layers of straw between. The barrels stayed in unheated buildings where temperatures hovered just above freezing. Different varieties were packed separately since some released ethylene gas that caused others to ripen prematurely. Late-keeping varieties like Winesap, Northern Spy, and Arkansas Black could last until May when properly stored. The barrels needed regular checking. One bad apple really could spoil the bunch through ethylene production and spreading rot. These stored apples provided fresh fruit through winter and essential pectin for making jellies from other preserved fruits. Some families designated certain trees specifically for keeping apples, picking them slightly underripe for maximum storage life. Vinegar pickling. Quick pickles made with vinegar provided near-instant preservation and added tangy variety to winter meals. Unlike fermented pickles that took weeks, vinegar pickles were ready within days and lasted months. The acid in vinegar, typically around 5% acidity, created an environment where harmful bacteria couldn't survive. Green beans, beets, onions, and mixed vegetables were blanched briefly, packed in jars, and covered with spiced vinegar solutions. These pickles added brightness to heavy winter meals dominated by preserved meats and starches. Every family had their secret pickling spice blend, often passed down through generations. Pickled eggs, a protein-rich convenience food, sat in gallon jars on tavern and general store counters. The vinegar was often infused with herbs, creating complex flavors that improved with age. These pickles required no special storage conditions beyond a cool, dark place, making them accessible to families without root cellars. Syruped fruit jars. Canning fruit in light sugar syrup preserved both texture and nutritional value better than heavy syrups or water alone. The sugar helped fruit maintain its shape and color while creating an environment inhospitable to microorganisms. Peaches, pears, cherries, and berries were packed into jars and covered with syrup made from equal parts sugar and water, though ratios varied based on the fruit's natural sweetness. The sealed jars underwent water bath processing, creating shelf-stable fruit that brightened winter tables. These preserved fruits weren't just desserts. They accompanied meat dishes, topped breakfast porridge, and provided quick energy during hard work. The leftover syrup became a valued ingredient, flavoring cakes, and sweetening beverages. Families often canned fruit in different syrup strengths, from light for everyday use to heavy for special occasions. Rendered lard crocks. Every bit of fat from butchered hogs was carefully rendered into snow-white lard that served as cooking fuel, baking ingredient, and preservation medium. The rendering process involved slowly heating chopped fat until it melted, then straining out the crispy cracklings that became treats or soap ingredients. The pure lard was poured into ceramic crocks and stored in cool cellars where it stayed fresh for a year or more. This wasn't just cooking fat. It was dense nutrition, providing 9 calories per gram when other foods were scarce. Lard made the flakiest pie crusts, crispiest fried chicken, and most tender biscuits. It could be flavored with herbs for special uses or mixed with salt for longer preservation. Beyond cooking, lard waterproofed leather, protected tools from rust, and soothed chapped skin. The amount of lard a family put up each year directly correlated with their food security and comfort level through winter. Meat under fat, confit. This French technique, adopted by many immigrant communities, preserved cooked meat for months without refrigeration. Pork, duck, or goose was salted overnight, then slowly cooked in its own fat until tender. The cooked meat was packed in crocks and completely covered with the strained cooking fat, which hardened into an airtight seal. Stored in cool cellars, this confit remained safe and delicious for 6 months or more. When needed, portions were dug out from under the protective fat layer, which was carefully smoothed back to reseal the remainder. The meat developed incredible flavor during storage, becoming a delicacy rather than mere sustenance. This method was particularly valuable for preserving the fattier cuts that didn't smoke or salt cure well. The seasoned fat itself became a valuable cooking medium, imparting rich flavors to vegetables and potatoes. Springhouse cooling. Properties blessed with natural springs had refrigeration centuries before electricity, using constantly flowing cold water to preserve perishables. Springhouses were small buildings built directly over springs, with water flowing through stone or concrete troughs. The year-round temperature of spring water, typically 50–55 degrees Fahrenheit, kept milk, butter, and cream fresh for days. Crocks and jars sat directly in the flowing water or on shelves cooled by evaporation from wet walls. The constant water movement prevented stagnation while maintaining steady temperatures regardless of weather. Butter molded and wrapped in cheesecloth stayed firm and fresh for weekly market trips. Fresh meat could be kept for several days, extending the time between butchering. Some springhouses featured multiple levels of troughs, allowing different temperature zones for various foods. These structures were so effective that many remained in use even after electric refrigeration became available, serving as backup during power outages. Ice house and ice box. Winter's cold became summer's preservation through the marvel of ice harvesting and storage. When ponds froze to at least 12 inches thick, communities gathered for ice harvests, cutting massive blocks with special saws. These blocks, some weighing 300 pounds, were hauled to ice houses, heavily insulated buildings filled with sawdust or straw. Properly packed ice lasted through the hottest summers, with some ice houses maintaining ice year-round. Home ice boxes, insulated wooden cabinets with zinc or tin linings, used smaller blocks delivered weekly by ice wagons. A 50-pound block could keep food cold for several days, with melted water draining into pans that needed regular emptying. The ice box's multiple compartments provided different temperature zones, with areas near the ice cold enough for meat and dairy. This system was so effective that many rural families continued using ice boxes into the 1950s, long after electric refrigerators became available in cities. Hard cheese waxing. Cheese preservation through waxing allowed families to make large batches when milk was abundant and age them for months or even years. After initial aging developed a firm rind, Wheels were dipped in melted paraffin or painted with multiple coats, creating an airtight seal that prevented moisture loss and mold growth. The waxed wheels aged in cool cellars at steady temperatures between 55 and 60 degrees, developing complex flavors impossible with fresh cheese. Different cheeses required different aging periods. Cheddar improved for at least 3 months, while aged Swiss could go 2 years. The wax coating allowed cheese to be transported and traded without spoilage, making it valuable currency in rural economies. Some families specialized in particular cheese types, building reputations that brought customers from miles around. These aged cheeses provided protein and calories when fresh milk wasn't available, and their concentrated flavors meant a little went a long way in cooking. Water-glassed eggs. This remarkable preservation method kept eggs fresh for up to 9 months using a simple sodium silicate solution. Fresh, unwashed eggs with intact bloom were carefully placed in crocks and covered with water-glass solution, 1 part sodium silicate to 9 parts boiled, cooled water. The solution sealed the shell's pores, preventing air and bacteria from entering while maintaining the egg's moisture. Stored in cool, dark places, these eggs remained usable for baking and cooking throughout winter when hens stopped laying. The eggs needed to be fresh when preserved, ideally less than 24 hours old, and completely clean but never washed. When needed, eggs were removed, rinsed, and used normally, though the whites didn't whip quite as high as fresh eggs. This method was so reliable that the U.S. Department of Agriculture promoted it during World War I for home food conservation. Oiled eggs. A simpler alternative to water glassing involved coating fresh eggs with mineral oil to seal the shells and extend storage life. Clean, uncracked eggs were warmed slightly, then dipped in or rubbed with food-grade mineral oil, ensuring complete coverage. The thin oil film prevented moisture loss and gas exchange through the shell's pores. These eggs, stored pointed end down in cool conditions, lasted 3 to 4 months. The process took just seconds per egg, making it practical for preserving large quantities during peak laying season. Oiled eggs maintained better flavor than water-glassed ones, and the whites still whipped reasonably well for baking. Regular turning prevented yolks from settling and sticking to shells. This method worked especially well for families with smaller flocks who needed to preserve dozens rather than hundreds of eggs. Dry beans and grain bins. Proper storage of dried legumes and grains meant the difference between plenty and hunger, requiring both technique and vigilance against pests. Beans and grains were thoroughly dried to below 14% moisture, then stored in tight containers, wooden bins, metal drums, or ceramic crocks with tight-fitting lids. Bay leaves, diatomaceous earth, or dried hot peppers mixed with stored goods deterred weevils and other insects. The storage area needed to be cool, dry, and dark, with good ventilation to prevent moisture buildup. Regular inspection caught problems early. A few weevils could destroy hundreds of pounds of stored food. Different grains required different handling. Wheat stored whole lasted years while maintaining nutrition. Corn needed especially dry conditions to prevent mold, and beans benefited from a light coating of oil to prevent splitting. Properly stored grains and legumes provided food security, livestock feed, and next year's seed crop. Pantry rotation system. Organization wasn't just tidiness, it was survival strategy, ensuring nothing spoiled before use. The first-in, first-out principle governed every shelf, with newer preserved goods placed behind older ones. Each jar bore a date, either written on the lid or tied on a tag. Detailed inventory lists tracked what was preserved, when, and how much remained. This system prevented the heartbreak of finding spoiled food when it was desperately needed. Monthly pantry checks identified any bulging lids, cloudy liquids, or other signs of spoilage. Different sections organized food by type and use frequency. Everyday items within easy reach, special occasion foods higher up. Some families kept detailed logs comparing preservation methods, noting which techniques worked best for specific foods. This systematic approach meant a well-run household could predict almost exactly when they'd run out of any given item. Seed and staple planning. The final preservation technique was perhaps the most important, planning next year's food supply while using this year's. Careful seed saving from the best plants ensured adapted varieties suited to local conditions. Detailed garden journals tracked planting dates, yields, and preservation success for each crop. Families calculated how many jars of tomatoes, pounds of potatoes, and gallons of sauerkraut they'd consumed, adjusting next year's planting accordingly. This planning extended beyond the garden, tracking how much meat a pig provided, how many eggs the hens laid monthly, how much milk the cow gave seasonally. Weather patterns, market prices, and family size changes all factored into these calculations. Successful families always preserved more than they thought they'd need, knowing that extra food meant security against crop failures, extended winters, or unexpected guests. Thanks for joining us on this trip down memory lane. If you enjoyed exploring these 25 preservation methods, give it a like and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe.